In the middle of nowhere, or rather, on the western frontier of the Hudson River, the last three Mohicans, Chingachgook, his son Uncas, and the adopted Hawkeye, were minding their own business, hunting to secure dinner. Being good neighbors, they shared their food with the Cameron family because back then there was no fast food, and the community helped each other out. But peace doesn't last long. Jack shows up, recruiting people for the New York militia. Hawkeye, having seen this movie before, and it wasn't Braveheart, warns that the locals don't care about this fight. The next day, British soldiers arrive to gather volunteers. Most decide to stay home, but Jack convinces a few to check out what General Webb has to offer. Meanwhile, Major Duncan heads to the city to meet Webb, who is already in the middle of negotiations with Jack. The deal is simple. The militiamen will fight in the fortress but can run back to protect their land if necessary. Duncan, being the aristocrat he is outraged that Webb is negotiating with mere commoners. Webb, out of patience for this nonsense, replies, "We need to win this war." Soon after, Duncan receives his mission: escort Colonel Monroe's daughters, Cora and Alice, to the fort. For their safety, Magua, a supposed Mohawk ally, will be their guide. Before the journey, Duncan takes his shot and proposes to Cora, but she, being polite, says he's a great friend. Not satisfied, he begs her to think about it. A man of hope. The trip continues, and Magua keeps pushing the group forward, claiming they need to find clean water. But, as it turns out, our mysterious guide has very different plans. He's no Mohawk at all but a Huron allied with the French. As soon as they reach the river, Magua reveals himself as the villain and signals for an ambush. The British soldiers become statistics, leaving only Duncan to protect the sisters. Luckily, Chingachgook and his sons are nearby, tracking suspicious footprints and ready to fire their rifles. After driving the Hurons away, they decide to take the survivors to the fort. Cora finds it inhumane not to bury the dead. Hawkeye, already hardened by war, explains that digging graves would only help the French find them. Now it makes sense. With that, Cora calms down and starts seeing Hawkeye differently. On the way, Uncas gets all shy around Alice, which is adorable, while Duncan, instead of being grateful for being alive, still tries to understand why Hawkeye hasn't enlisted. Hawkeye, calmly, responds that he and his family just want a place to live. But then comes the blow. When they arrive at the Cameron farm, they find it completely destroyed, with the owners brutally murdered. Nothing was stolen, meaning the French were responsible, not just random looters. The group moves on, camping only when night falls. As a genius strategy, they choose an indigenous burial ground because even the Hurons know that angry spirits are no joke. When they finally reach the fort, they realize it's already under siege. No time for drama, they cross the river to sneak in. Monroe is happy to see his daughters but furious to learn that his order for them not to come never arrived. The reason? Magua sabotaged everything. Now all they can do is pray that the next message arrives in time. Meanwhile, Magua rushes to tell General Lewis about the sisters' escape and that the British will likely send a new messenger. Back at the fort, Cora shows her nurturing side by tending to Uncas's wound, while Hawkeye takes the opportunity to flirt. Later, he and his family ensure the new messenger has a smooth journey, eliminating any Hurons who get in the way. After the mission, Hawkeye tries to convince Monroe to let the colonists leave to protect their land. But Duncan, still bitter with jealousy, lies and says there's no proof the French attacked the Cameron farm. Monroe, influenced by the lie, decrees that no one is allowed to leave the fort. And to top it off, anyone who disobeys will be executed. Cora, overhearing everything, decides that now is the right time to officially reject Duncan. Meanwhile, Hawkeye, not being foolish, helps Jack and the militiamen escape, but he and his family stay behind. They have bigger concerns: protecting the Monroe sisters. Now, here's something interesting. Daniel Day-Lewis took his role so seriously that he learned to load and fire a musket while running and even lived in the forest to prepare for the character. That's commitment. Now, if I were in this story, I definitely wouldn't follow Magua anywhere, because anyone who refuses a rest stop is clearly up to something. And maybe I'd have suggested that Cora give Hawkeye a chance sooner, because their chemistry was clearly more intense than the siege on the fort. But anyway, on another completely peaceful morning in the British fortress, Hawkeye is arrested for sedition. Cora, with her patience level already in the negatives, decides to give her father a piece of her mind and throws it in Duncan's face that he flat out lied. And as if that weren't enough, she declares if Hawkeye is guilty, then so am I. Later, she visits Hawkeye in prison, because nothing says forbidden romance like iron bars and an impending war. Meanwhile, the French show up knocking on the fortress doors, bringing a not-so-friendly letter from General Webb. "Nobody's coming to save you. You'd better surrender." Monroe, realizing that the British military leadership clearly doesn't care about its soldiers, accepts an agreement with the French to sneak away and catch the first ship home. But wait, there's still someone unhappy with this decision: Magua. He wants revenge on Monroe for turning his life into a special episode of Game of Thrones. Indigenous Edition. Louis, the French leader, says politics are politics, but what Magua does in his free time is his own business. Magua, being Magua, takes the hint and stores that little grudge for later. The next morning, the British leave the fortress, thinking they're about to enjoy a peaceful walk. Little did they know that Magua and his friends had other plans. Total massacre. In the chaos, Cora starts shooting at anyone who gets close while protecting Alice. Magua finds Monroe and decides to take the colonel's heart. Literally. Hawkeye and his crew manage to escape and steal some canoes to flee, but they realize they're being followed. The solution: dump the canoes off a waterfall and hide behind it. When they see the Hurons approaching, Hawkeye and his family decide to jump, leaving Cora, Alice, and Duncan to be captured. Duncan, of course, calls them cowards, while Cora just looks at him. Now prisoners, Cora, Alice, and Duncan are taken to the Huron village, where Magua has some very bad plans for them. But then Hawkeye appears, crashing the party with the confidence of a man with zero backup plan. He argues with the tribe's chief, while Duncan translates that maybe killing everyone isn't the best diplomatic strategy. Magua, however, thinks total domination is a much better idea. The chief listens to both sides and makes a decision. Magua can keep Alice, Hawkeye can take Duncan, and Cora, well, she'll be burned alive. In a desperate move, Hawkeye offers his own life for hers, but Duncan, in an unexpected plot twist, mistranslates and offers himself instead. Magua takes Alice, Hawkeye escapes with Cora, and as one final mercy, he shoots Duncan from a distance to spare him the agony of the fire. If that's not love, I don't know what is. And then it all falls apart. Hawkeye and his crew chase after Magua to save Alice, but Uncas, young and impulsive, rushes ahead and attacks alone. Magua throws him off a cliff like he's taking out the trash. Alice, realizing her life with Magua would be pure psychological torture, chooses free fall instead. When Hawkeye and Chingachgook arrive, the final duel happens. Chingachgook wins, avenging his son. After the battle, they mourn their losses, and Chingachgook, as the last of his people, proclaims himself the last of the Mohicans. If I were in this story, I'd definitely not get caught up in a war between European empires as an unarmed extra. I'd probably find a boat and row to some isolated island until this all blew over. One thing I found interesting was how the film critiques the hypocrisy of war. Monroe starts with a speech about honor but ends up choosing survival over fighting for leaders who abandoned him. That was well done. Now, I leave you with this other interesting video to continue this session. Take care, and see you there.